transitioning to a clean energy economy. Let's get started. That is the name of our first session. The world at the moment is undergoing a massive shift, as well as in some parts of the world, a shock in how we power our homes and our cars. It's a transition from fossil fuels like oil, coal, and gas to more sustainable sources like solar and wind. That is underway. And for some, the transition is going too fast. Others, much too slow. So how do governments and businesses do both? Provide cleaner resources, but also insulate consumers from sky-high prices for the fuels we're using today. And I'm pleased to be joined now by David Turk, Deputy Secretary for the U.S. Department of Energy. His experience working on climate at the State Department, as well as the Deputy Executive Director at the IEA, makes him a perfectly placed and apt voice for this conversation. David, thank you so much. I want to begin with President Biden's climate goal, half emissions by the end of this decade. But to get there, he needs the help of Congress. And at the moment, much of his plans, key plans, is being blocked by a member of his own party even. How do you see the U.S. reaching this target?
Well, first of all, Annmarie, thanks for having me with you. It's just a pleasure to join you in this discussion, and an incredibly timely discussion given what's going on right now, a couple weeks before the COP, all the dynamic nature of energy markets right now, and really a historic opportunity to accelerate our clean energy transition, not only here in the U.S., but globally as well. And I think to your question, it's useful to take a bit of a step back. There's a lot of authorities, there's a lot of funding that the government currently has, that the federal government currently has. And when President Biden came in and my boss, Secretary Granholm, came in, we took a look at all those authorities, all those funding streams, and made sure that we were maximally leveraging as much as we possibly could from that. So we do about $8 billion US per year on clean energy research and development. We launched a series of Earth shots to really push the prices down on hydrogen, clean energy hydrogen, on long duration storage, on all of those key technologies, further reducing the costs on solar. We've got a 30 gigawatt target on offshore wind. Our loan program is back up and running under the leadership of Jigar Shah to make sure that we were pushing loans out. EPA has a whole sorts of regulatory authorities, including on methane emissions, that we'll see in a few weeks period of time. So there's an awful lot the government is doing, has been doing throughout this administration. But you're right, this is a historic window of opportunity on Capitol Hill. And we've been spending an awful lot of time with key senators, with key members in the House of Representatives, providing technical assistance, having those discussions so that we get the maximum benefit, both from the bipartisan bill and then the reconciliation bill as well.
From those conversations, do you think that that clean electricity plan that would basically give utilities this incentive to ditch oil, coal, and gas and move towards solar and wind, nuclear, do you see that now dead on arrival given where Senator Manchin stands?
Well, I think, again, it's useful to look at the totality of what's in the bipartisan bill already. Huge amounts of demonstration authorities that the United States Department of Energy would be administering on hydrogen, on CCUS, on a range of technologies, a variety of incentives in there for electric vehicles. And then there's a number of components in the reconciliation and active conversations going on right now. Conversations with key senators and members of the House yesterday among themselves, and then the president engaging with progressives and moderates today. And we're regularly engaging with all folks on there. And I think it's important to really emphasize that there's a number of pathways. There's a number of different ways of getting at this. Again, it is, you mentioned the 50 to 52% goal by 2030 that the president has put on the table. That's an ambitious goal, and we have to realize that. And we have to push the various levers, the various authorities to get us there. But there are a number of really interesting forward-looking proposals that are being discussed right now on Capitol Hill.
One proposal being discussed on Capitol Hill is a carbon tax. Would you support that?
So again, there's a number of different policy proposals, legislative proposals on the Hill right now. And what we've been doing from the Department of Energy, we have a whole flotilla of folks who've literally been working their whole careers in this space. And we've been providing technical assistance on an ongoing basis to all of the different senators, all of the different members of Congress who are putting forward a range of proposals. And what we're trying to do is to inform those conversations. I spent 8 years earlier in my career working on Capitol Hill, and it's Article 1, we're Article 2 in the executive branch, and it will be members in Congress who decide what are the particular plans and proposals that there's enough support to move forward on. And what we're doing from our end is informing that conversation and saying, here's the way you could structure this proposal, here's the way you could structure this proposal to get the most benefit for taxpayer funding and the most benefit from this truly historic opportunity. It really is a historic window to get these kinds of authorities, these kinds of funding streams. And again, we're doing everything we can to be supportive and helpful in those conversations among members of Congress.
You mentioned at the start, it's such a critical moment in time because we are also coming up on the COP26 event. Does the president risk walking into Glasgow with an empty bag of no deliverables to show off to the other countries because his agenda is being stalled in Congress?
Well, I have to say, I feel incredibly honored to be part of this administration because of all that we have done, the proposals that the president has put on the table, and the kinds of very constructive discussions on Capitol Hill. Again, I think it's useful to take a step back and realize what we've done already in this administration, the kinds of goals, the kinds of proposals, the kinds of funding streams, revitalizing things like our loan program. That is literally tens of billions of dollars that can be used to get new clean energy industries up and running and helping communities, promoting jobs in addition to the climate benefits that come from that. So the record already of this administration, I think, is incredibly strong. You look at what was done recently on hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, super pollutants on the climate side. That is an incredibly impactful piece of climate legislation. And as the president has said, and I worked for Senator Biden when he was in the Senate, and I know his legislative skills and I know his relationships up on Capitol Hill. Sometimes Congress doesn't always work as quickly as one might want it to work, but the fundamentals, I think, are there for a deal to be had, and there are very, very constructive, good faith discussions going on, and the president, of course, Secretary Granholm, myself, others of us, very actively engaging in those discussions. So I feel like the U.S. has an amazing amount of credibility in really stepping up to the they're really trying to push out so that they can achieve that 450 gigawatt target, bring the benefits to the Indian population, not only on the climate side, but energy security, energy independence, was green hydrogen and long duration storage. And that's what we're investing on the storage side, $1 billion a year to reduce those costs. So I think there's actually a nice complementary set of arrangements between us and India and a number of other countries, everyone using their levers as much as we can. But there's no doubt every country needs to step up to the plate. Every country needs to do more, and we all need to move forward. There's no solution to climate change unless everybody's stepping up.
But on China, especially recently, the rhetoric from the highest levels of the government is to scour the market for coal, excuse me. They're going after everything they can, and their term is energy security. Is it a massive blow about what is going on right now at the energy crisis in China, as well as the fact that Xi Jinping will just not attend?
So there is absolutely no doubt China needs to step up and do more, as other countries around the world need to step up and do more. China's carbon footprint is huge. Around 30% of global emissions come from China. We have seen some progress from China, including the recent announcement to not fund coal projects overseas, but they need to do more. They need to peak well before 2030, which is what their goal is right now, if humanity has a chance of avoiding the worst consequences of climate change. So our hope is we'll do everything we can domestically in the US, we'll actively engage with countries around the world, and we'll use whatever levers we have to try to make progress around the world. But there's no doubt China needs to step up and do more.
Alongside all these conversations about COP26 and climate change and their transition, there's also some uneasiness within the administration, and we reported on this about the rising energy costs. We see this for natural gas. We see this all over the world. And at the moment, there's no crisis per se in the United States, but the EIA says that this winter, if you heat your home with natural gas, you could see your bill increase by 30%. Does the administration have plans to try to ease some of these concerns for consumers and soften that potentially higher bill cost?
Well, the short answer is absolutely. We're paying very, very close attention to the costs on the natural gas side, to oil, to what our U.S. citizens and others pay at the pump. And I think it's important to think about this in two ways. We need to do two things simultaneously, and I think we can walk and chew gum, as they say. One is we clearly need to accelerate the clean energy transition. We need to make those investments in the clean energy technologies of the future at a scale and at a pace that we've not yet done. We need more energy storage out in the system. We need more versatile, clean hydrogen in the system. We need more in a diverse range of renewables into the system. Offshore wind, I mentioned earlier, is an incredibly important renewable that we need more of into the system. There are higher capacity factors with that offshore wind. If you dovetail offshore wind with onshore wind, with solar, with geothermal, with nuclear, you get a mix of clean energies coming into the system with storage, with reliability, with resilience. And so we need to invest more. We need to actually invest more and quicker in those clean energy technologies. And then secondly, we do need to actively manage the existing issues that we have with existing fuels to make sure that they're available, that they're affordable, and they're reliable for consumers. And we have had discussions with our interagency partners under White House leadership on a daily basis over these last days, making sure that we've got the best numbers, knowing what's happening in the US and around the world when it comes to oil and natural gas and retail gasoline at the pump in terms of the prices. So very active conversations, including with private sector, including with state and local governments. The Northeast of the United States in particular is an area that we're paying a lot of attention to on natural gas heating, other sources of heating, to make sure that we're doing everything we can from the federal government side of things to be prepared with our partners to deal with any contingency.
I'm from New York, so yes, the Northeast, it gets very, very cold in the winter, and I imagine consumers are concerned about potentially those heating costs. You talk about gasoline prices. WTI is pushing $84, not Brent, WTI. That's way more closely interconnected with what U.S. consumers will face at the pump. What are the plans in these discussions you're having? Is potentially unleashing some oil from the SPR, is that an option?
Well, it's useful to, again, take a step back and appreciate how we got to this point. And what we saw was the oil market and the natural gas market have huge swings with COVID, right? You'll recall when COVID hit and many of us stayed home. A lot of us are still working from home these days. We had a huge drop in demand for oil, for natural gas, to the point where the prices went to areas we've never seen. We actually saw negative prices, as you recall, Annmarie, for a period of time. And everyone was scrambling. I was at the International Energy Agency at the time, where we helped coordinate an extraordinary G20 meeting to deal with negative prices and to deal with really low prices for oil and natural gas. And now as the economy heats back up coming out of COVID, the supply side is lagging that. And so we're seeing these price swings in ways that lead to some real volatility. And so again, we're having conversations with our key domestic industries on this with our oil and gas producing companies. We're having conversations across the world with a variety of producers and consumers, whether OPEC and OPEC plus or beyond OPEC and OPEC plus producers like Norway, like Canada, like other countries along those lines. And no options are off the table. The president has said that he wants to do everything he can to make sure that we've got affordable, reliable supplies of energy for our citizens, our people around the country, and that's what we'll do. So no options are off the table.
So potentially, if prices go so high, we could unlock the SPR.
So that will be a decision the president makes, the Secretary of Energy makes along those lines. And what we're doing now is helping to inform those conversations with our EIA. You mentioned our EIA, which is a part of DOE, putting out nonpartisan, independent data statistics. So we have the best information for decision making going forward. And we're actively having those conversations with this White House under their direction to make sure that any decision that's made by the president is well informed and will have the impact that we have it. But the president, I can tell you, the president, his senior advisors, Secretary Granholm, all of us are incredibly focused on the impact to consumers and making sure that this recovery coming out of COVID is as smooth as it can be, including with energy supplies and affordability.
Going a little bit more back to natural gas, there's also debate on, and I know the press secretary, Jen Psaki, said, at the moment, we want to continue exporting natural gas. That's actually helping to potentially lower the price in the market. But what would it take for the U.S. to curb or stop those exports of natural gas?
So one thing I think it's useful to emphasize, Annmarie, is we are in an incredibly privileged position here in the U.S. versus a lot of countries around the world when it comes to natural gas supplies and the current price, right? The current price of natural gas here in the U.S., it's a little more expensive. It's quite a bit more expensive in the Northeast, but it's a little over $5 compared to where natural gas is now, and looking to the futures into the winter in Europe and in Asia, where it's $30 or so. So right now we're producing more natural gas than we use. We're actually storing more natural gas, preparing for the winter along those lines. And we have had a very active trade in natural gas internationally. LNG terminals, around 16% right now of our natural gas goes abroad to a variety of countries around the world. So again, we are having conversations internally with the White House, with our interagency partners, in making sure we're doing everything we can to help, first and foremost, our people here in the United States, but also looking and working with our partners around the world as well.
Will the DOE approve potentially additional export licenses for LNG plants or new plants?
So it's useful to underscore that right now we have around 4 times the amount of authorizations that previous administrations have already made on natural gas than is actually being exported. So right now the constraint on natural gas is really the physical constraint at our LNG terminals. These are huge projects. They cost a lot of money. They take a lot of years to get online. So we actually have quite a hard ceiling in terms of how much natural gas can be shared through LNG to other countries around the world. And we're almost at that physical constraint on that side. What that means, certainly in the near term, is we will have that quite significant price differential where American taxpayers, American citizens will have much, much cheaper gas than other countries around the world.
I have a little bit more also of just a going forward question about natural gas. It is one of these controversial fuels because obviously it's much cleaner than coal, but there's still methane leaks. Environmentalists absolutely hate natural gas. They say it should not be part of the transition. How does the administration view natural gas as a fuel? Where does it fit?
So the way I come at this, Annmarie, is energy is a good thing. Energy powers our lives. It powers our schools. It powers our businesses. It powers our economies. What we have to focus on is emissions. And we have to have the laser-like focus. We have to have the incredibly ambitious goals that this president has laid out, because that's what science is telling us we need to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. We're spending billions and billions of dollars every year in our country and countries around the world to already deal with the consequences of climate change. As I mentioned, we've got 1 out of our 3 U.S. citizens who personally witnessed, personally experienced these consequences of climate change. And so we need to step up and we need to focus on those emissions with laser focus and accelerate those emission reductions. Now, there's a number of ways you can reduce emissions. Renewables, incredibly important. Solar PV is the new king of electricity. We're seeing the price points on solar incredibly price competitive with coal, with other sources of electricity generation going forward. Offshore wind, onshore wind, geothermal. We think nuclear is playing and can play an incredibly important role going forward. And then there's a range of what's called CCUS technologies that can sequester or utilize emissions coming from natural gas, coming from other fossil fuels, so that we can get the benefits of that energy, but reduce those emissions and dramatically reduce those emissions. We also, on the natural gas side, need to focus on the methane emission side of things. We release way too many emissions throughout the value chain on natural gas, not only here in the US, but Russia and other countries around the world. And we've got to get a handle on that. That's just product going to waste. We need to clamp down on those emissions. And this administration has been and will be incredibly ambitious and aggressive on methane emissions.
And given the higher energy prices, is it feasible potentially the Department of Energy would lift the ban on federal drilling? Is that one of the options that you've been discussing in these meetings?
So that is not a particular authority of ours. That's the Department of Interior and other departments and agencies who have some of those regulatory authorities. We're, of course, part of those conversations and informing those conversations. But that is something, again, this administration is, I have to say, I'm honored to be part of this administration. It's an incredibly competent group of experts who've worked on these issues for years and years, and really relying on and working in partnership with folks who are part of our civil service who've literally served for decades on these issues. And active conversations, of course, are happening all over these issues.
When you look at the administration and the United States' energy sources, we are ranked number 3 when it comes to, and this moves around a lot, but it comes to the production of oil and gas. We have vast amount of resources here, but President Biden wants to be a climate president. Do you find that this message is inconsistent?
Well, again, I think we have to do two things simultaneously, and I think this administration is trying to do those two things simultaneously. To reach our climate objectives, to make sure that we've got the good jobs of the future, the well-paying jobs of the future, revitalize communities. This president has made the most ambitious commitment of any president to reduce our emissions, to revitalize our economies and communities, to have those good-paying jobs of the future in this clean energy revolution that we're in the midst of. But it's an incredibly ambitious set of goals, that 50 to 52% reduction by 2030. Clean electricity, 100% clean electricity by 2035, and a net zero economy by 2050. That's only 28 years. For those of us who are getting a little bit older, 28 years is not that much time to get to net zero throughout our economy. This is an incredibly ambitious set of goals and tasks that are before us, and we need to get going. We can't just set a target out there at 2050 and wait to start working on this 10, 20, 15 years from now. We've got to work day in and day out now in order to reduce those emissions. So personally, I get frustrated when I see some countries and companies and others set 2050 or 2060 targets, but they're not showing that near-term activity with that aggressive, ambitious, but real-world nature to it to really move those emissions down at the scale and pace that we need to. So that's what we're trying to do in this administration.
We have about 6 minutes left, and I do want to get to some viewer questions. And one comes from Andreas in Connecticut. And I know this is something you've been working on when it comes to Earth shots and you're excited about. He says, what are the obstacles to switching to hydrogen? I know you have been doing some research into that space.
Well, thanks, Annmarie. What we've done is taken a look at what are the range of technologies, and we're going to need a whole full suite of technologies in order to be successful to get to net zero, not just in electricity, but in transport and industry and buildings across the sphere. We're going to need a range of technologies and technological tools to get us there. So what we've done is we've done a whole series of analysis thinking about what are those key enabling technologies that are so critical to get us to that 2050 net zero. And we're in the midst of launching what we're calling a series of Earth shots. Those technology areas that are critical that we really need to have a full coordinated US government approach, public and private working together to really do whatever we can to reduce those price points, to get those technologies out there and scale. The first Earth shots that we launched was on clean hydrogen, with a goal of $1 per kilogram of clean hydrogen within the decade. That is an incredibly ambitious goal. It's an 80% reduction from where we're at right now on electrolysis for hydrogen produced by renewables. We've got to invest in our national labs. We have 17 national labs that we're bringing to the table to work on these Earth shots. We've got to work public and private to make sure that any solutions that originate in our labs go out to commercial scale as quickly as we possibly can. So I think hydrogen is one of the most interesting, versatile energy sources of the future. It provides solutions not only for heavy-duty transport, for a variety of industrial applications, and we're trying to get on with it with this Earthshot to drive those costs down so that it can be available at scale as quickly as it possibly can be.
Speaking of technology, during the pandemic, we also saw a hack against Colonial Pipeline. Have you seen fresh technology to really fortify our pipelines and our grids from these potential cyber attacks?
So this is something I'm working on a daily basis. We've got an incredibly capable group here at the Department of Energy, working with the White House, working with the Department of Homeland Security, working with our intelligence agencies across the board, and working very much with the private sector as well. On the technology piece, and I know you've spent a lot of time, rightfully so in my opinion, Annmarie, on cybersecurity and these issues throughout your career. From the Department of Energy side, one of the things we're trying to do is use those 17 national labs and try to push these technologies that can be helpful for private sector actors, for the government, for monitoring, for building in resilience by design. So I visited our Idaho National Lab a few months ago, where we're doing some cutting edge cybersecurity research on technologies that are already out there in the market and will be out there in the market going forward. A few weeks ago, I participated with the director, Martin Keller, from the National Renewable Energy Lab to kick off a cybersecurity accelerator where the private sector can come in, use a live test bed at NREL, our National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado, to test their new products on cybersecurity. So again, we can get those in the marketplace as quickly as we can. So we're absolutely focused on that.
Is fortifying a fossil fuel grid or pipeline different than potentially cyber attacks against wind or solar?
So what we have to focus on is having cybersecurity by design right from the get-go with all of these technologies, all of these companies, all the processes that we all need to undertake to avoid phishing, to avoid all those kinds of encounters. And we need to have a resilience. We need to have a resilience when those attacks, ransomware attacks or other attacks come in along those lines. So we are actively working with all parts of the energy spectrum right now. Some of the solutions are more particular to certain sectors than other sectors, but there's a lot of commonality between not only parts of the energy sector, but other critical infrastructure when it comes to cybersecurity. And there's an all of interagency strategy that this administration is pushing on the cybersecurity side of things.
I think I have time for one more. And this question kind of brings us back, David, to the very start of our conversation. And if it's whether or not the Energy Department is still considering using the executive authority on its own for the Clean Energy Payment Program. This is the program we started the conversation with that at the moment is being debated whether or not it's going to go into the reconciliation package that the president supports.
Well, again, Annmarie, what we're trying to do is use all our existing funding streams, authorities, and really push the envelope wherever we can on that front. And then secondly, take advantage of this historic window of time on Capitol Hill with the bipartisan infrastructure deal, with the reconciliation discussions that are ongoing right now. There's a number of pathways to get us to where we need to get to. It's an incredibly ambitious goal that's on the table. And so we have to have pathways that are going to deliver. And we're focused in providing technical assistance to our key members of Congress who are leading on these efforts so that we can inform those conversations. But again, we've got to do everything we can with existing authorities, existing funding streams, but then also take advantage of this historic window. And I have no doubt that whatever emerges from Capitol Hill will truly be historic, will be unprecedented, and will be a huge, huge help to what we're doing going forward.
If I could push you on this slightly, would that mean if you're going to open up the entire toolbox, there would be another look, if this gets shut down, to using grants to reward the states to increase some of those clean energy alternatives?
So we work with utilities right now. We work with state governments right now. It's just a matter of scale of what kinds of funding streams that we have available to work with state governments and sending state governments or utilities or others. And there's a variety of discussions right now about how to have different authorities, different funding streams that can work in partnership with states, with utilities, with others in the private sector and local governments as well. So again, there's a number of pathways here, and that's those are the discussions we're having right now with key leaders on the Hill.